the work that we do, whether we deliver a service or we make a product, is inextricably bound to who we are as people, and like it or not. And Khalil Gibran said, if you bake a bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And that is the truth.
Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Reshad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to ReshadOberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day Leadership Challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. Hello, leaders, and welcome to this week's show. I'm excited today to be joined by Shawn Askinosie, founder and CEO of Askinosie Chocolate. Shawn is also the author of Meaningful Work, in which he details insights into doing work with heart and creating a business with a soul. In 2006, Shawn left a successful career as a criminal defense lawyer to start Askinosie Chocolate, which is a bean-to-bar chocolate factory, and he is, with his team, doing incredible work around the world, improving the lives of many. Shawn, welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's awesome and a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm really excited to chat. I mentioned in your introduction, you're a chocolate maker, you were a lawyer for a while, and you're just doing all these really awesome and cool things I'm excited to talk with you about. First of all, I have to ask, do any of your chocolate bars contain the golden ticket?
All of them do.
Awesome. Well, let's get into that a little bit more.
Take a bite.
You know what? I have yet to sample. I have heard amazing things about your chocolate, but I look forward to grabbing myself a bar.
Please. Yeah.
So, yeah. But serious question. I'd like to start with a little bit of a backstory. And could you tell us how you go from criminal defense to making chocolate?
Sure. I would say that the path was one that was littered with suffering, a little bit of anxiety, depression, and I kept working my day job. And this is often the way it is for, I'm sure, most of your listeners. We don't, unless you win the lottery or something like that, we're faced with kind of straddling both sides of this world, of one in which we're, just struggling and unhappy in our current situation, knowing that we need to find another passion, and trying and desperately, in my case, searching for that, all while keeping one foot in the other world of, this is what I do to make a living. This is how I feed my family. I have to do a good job at this. I have to show up. I have to be someone who's paying attention. And so it was hard, it wasn't easy. And I had a simple prayer that I prayed every day, which was, "Dear God, please give me something else to do." And I meant it. And, I went to law school, and before that I was in commercial real estate and in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I didn't have any hobbies. I didn't know how to do anything else. I took 0 business classes in college. I just knew the courtroom. That's it. And that wasn't working for me. So I just, got some hobbies and started doing some other things. And one thing led to another, and I wound up in the Amazon.
That's cool. And I mean, it is quite a change in the world, and like what you describe as far as that, that sense of responsibility and that ownership and that desire to continue to, provide for your family and earn a living and do those things, and you're torn between that and wanting to change. But it's nice that you found that transition. Talking a little bit about your company and making chocolate, you're doing all these cool things, and you're contributing to a better world, and you're influencing kind of in the ways that you can. Did you find out that you liked making chocolate and then find out you wanted to make a difference in the world, or how did that come together?
No, that's an interesting question. I actually, I never had a sort of separate thought. I've never had a separate thought of difference in the world. I've never really, that has not really been a thought that I've had. It's been a little bit more kind of jumbled up than that. So, for example, my dad died when I was 14. He had lung cancer, and he was a lawyer too, and I was the oldest, and that was a really, really, really tough time for me. And so having, watched him go through that and me go through it too, and just his illness, and just watching him deteriorate, and it kind of, I didn't really know it at the time, but I could tell over time that that experience kind of left me with it left me with some compassion. And so there would be opportunities to kind of use that muscle in high school and college and beyond. And so I never really viewed myself as kind of thinking, okay, well, I'm going to quit my law practice factory because I want to do some good in the world. It was, as I say, it was more jumbled up than that. It was kind of more complex than that in a way. And in another way, it was just more simple, which was I was someone who experienced, a really tough situation when I was younger, and it ended up giving me some compassion, and I have tried to use it. I've tried to be aware of where that might be exercised and used. So in my law career, I mean, I did some pro bono work and represented people for free in some cases, and even in those that I didn't, I viewed myself as a person who was advocating for justice. And so the work that I did before I became a chocolate maker was sort of just steeped in one kind of justice or another. And so when I wanted to quit law and start something else, and then started this chocolate factory, I knew going in, I mean, I knew whatever I was going to do, whatever it turned out to be, whether it was cupcakes, which I thought about for a while, or chocolate or whatever, I knew there would be some component of engaging with the community around me, whatever it was going to be. And so from the beginning, from the very, very beginning of this chocolate business and working with farmers and students and the neighborhood and all of that, it just all sort of fell in naturally, and never a sort of separate thought of I'm going to do this business and I'm going to do good. It didn't come up like that. That's a really long answer. Gee whiz, I'm sorry.
No, and it's yeah, I love the backstory, Shawn, and I think it illustrates more about, the thought process doesn't have to be separate. It can be very much intertwined into the nature of who you are and who your business is, in terms of doing good in the world, which is something that I strongly believe in. So I'd love to give you a chance here to just talk a little bit about some of the things you are doing. I know You're doing some things with the farmers where you source your beans from, and as well as some things locally at home where you're educating people and things like that. But why don't you talk about some of the ways you're enriching the lives of people around the world, and then I'll ask you a follow-up question to that.
Well, let's rewind the tape, for those of your listeners who remember what that might be, just a second, because you said something that I want to just pick up, and actually it fits nicely with your question. And that is, and this is essentially what you were saying, the work that we do, whether we deliver a service or we make a product, is inextricably bound to who we are as people, and like it or not. And Khalil Gibran said, if you bake a bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half man's hunger. And that is the truth. And so I did not bake a bitter bread when I practiced law, and I don't make a bitter bread now as a chocolate maker, because I don't live out my life with indifference. And so the things that we do to sort of pick up your question, the sort of doing things related to the chocolate business is very much connected to that. And so, like we were saying, or we were talking about in the very start of our conversation, I mean, these are things that just kind of fell into place. And I think partly because we were open to them and we were willing to take action, even though we didn't necessarily know what we were doing. And so some of those things, for example, and I would also say preliminarily too, we're a really small company. I mean, there's only 17 full-time people in the whole thing. And it's small by design. It's been that way forever and probably will be. And and we can talk about why later if you want, but so we make chocolate. I mean, that's what we do. And we want to make the best tasting chocolate that we can. We were in the very beginning of this bean to bar movement. There were only 3 people in the US starting at the same time. And now there's, I mean, there's probably, I don't know, 200 or 300, but we're still winning awards. We're very competitive when it comes to quality chocolate, quality cocoa beans. And that, I would say, is our vocation. But we have these other vocations that, and there are people who talk about a vocation within a vocation. And that's what we have. So one of them is working with farmers. The other is working with students. We have a program called Chocolate University. And then we have something that we do with farmers called direct trade. And so, for example, we profit share with farmers. We open our books to farmers. We translate our financial statements into their language so they can understand the profit share calculation. When I was last in Tanzania, our financials were in Swahili. Our Chocolate University program has kind of taken on a life of its own. It's now, just recently, its own public charity, so people can make a tax deductible contribution if they share our passion and want to help. And for example, through that foundation, we just built and opened a preschool in remote Tanzania. It's called a Chekechea. And that is connected to the cocoa farmers there where we buy our beans. And it was one of their points of vision for the farmers. They wanted to have early childhood education. So we built the school and they run it. And we don't. But we also have an after-school program called Empowered Girls. And then there wasn't a corollary program for boys and no curriculum that we could find. So we started our own. So we literally run, fund, and manage Empowered Girls and now Enlightened Boys. We have 6 clubs. Since we've been doing this, probably we calculated between 6,000 and 7,000 children have gone through those after-school programs when counting our program here in the United States near my hometown of Springfield, Missouri. We have had school lunch programs in Tanzania and the Philippines. we have supplied sustainably over 1 million school lunches in those two countries with zero donations. We have an elementary school and middle school and high school program in my hometown. And in the high school program, it's really competitive to get in this program. But if you're selected, we have a semester-long project where people learn about what we're doing in Tanzania and learn about our business model. And then they get to know each other by spending a week on a nearby university campus in the summer. And then they go home and pack, and we meet them at the airport and take them to Tanzania. So it's truly transformative. That program is in its 10th year. And so the list goes on and on. But those are just some of the things that we're doing at home and in these countries, and all the while making the best chocolate that we possibly can. But we're a very, very small company.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to draw attention to that again, as you mentioned, right? Your team is your whole company is 17 full-time people, and yet you've touched the lives of probably tens of thousands of people across the world, and supplied these lunches, and you've got all these programs going on, which is just incredible. And here's the follow-up question to this, which is, I get chocolate, I get why you make chocolate, it's delicious to eat, but why do all the good? I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here, but why do all the good, since we are consistently taught that the job of a business is to make money?
Great question, and I hope you push me on this. Because it's a great question, and one that and a question that should really be discussed. Milton Friedman, famous economist, Nobel Prize winning economist, said words to the effect that he can trust a company more whose stated mission is to make a profit than one whose stated mission is to change the world. And so that statement is worthy of discussion, and one that in this day and age needs a lot of scrutiny, because there's a lot of truth to it. And so, and I actually think that it's in large measure, probably the default setting should be, yes, that's true, that a company's obligation, depending on its structure, is to its shareholder. Its obligation is to shareholder value or to investor return. And there are companies, within the last 2 years, let's say pre-COVID, big companies in North America that have signed on to this pledge to care more about employees and care more about the inequality of wealth. And as a skeptic, like kind of as you're pointing out, I'm saying to myself, well, sure. The reason they are signing on to these pledges and making these commitments is because they recognize that without solving these issues, it will be the death of themselves. And it's a matter of self-preservation in my skeptical mind. And so, well, then where's the resolution to that? You would ask, what is a person to do? Well, I think that we need to be mindful consumers of whatever it may be. And I'm not saying every single thing that you consume or purchase needs to have a 10-page research paper written about it, but think about the things that you enjoy and that you might be able to just check and see, well, I really like whatever this may be. I think I'm going to spend some time researching where this thing comes from, or how did they get it, or how did they make it. I recognize I can't do that with everything, but I can pick some things to pay attention to. And so for me, it isn't all about profit. And I'm the only owner of the company. And recently my daughter, who's my co-author in the book and our chief marketing officer, but it's me and my daughter. We don't have partners. We don't have investors. I don't have private equity. I don't have those kind of obligations, except for on some real estate debt, for the factory or whatever it might be, but that's it. So that means that I'm free, and I am free. And I know what it is that I need. In fact, the title of the third chapter of my book is "How Much Is Enough?" Well, that's an important question that we need to be asking ourselves in this society, otherwise known as the sufficiency economy. How much is enough? Well, if you are an owner of a company and you can answer that question, recognizing that the target moves all the time, and it could be how much is enough, whatever. It could be how much is enough top line revenue, how much is enough Instagram followers, how much is enough cash flow, whatever. But if you can begin to even ask the question and have some modicum of an answer, then that means you can pay attention to other things. It doesn't have to be all about top line revenue and bottom line profit, because then you have this freedom, and you have freedom to behave differently. And I don't owe anybody anything. So if I want to feed kids in the Philippines because it's the right thing to do, I can do it. And I don't want people to buy our chocolate, people who are tuning in, or they've listened to this and they know nothing else about me. I don't want people to say, you know what, I'm going to buy his chocolate. That's so cool. He's sharing profits with farmers, and what a cool company. Okay, I'm just going to buy their chocolate. I don't care. Now I don't mind if people say, hey, that's kind of a cool story. I wonder if I could do that with my company. I think I'll check them out, and they buy a chocolate bar, but I want them to come back because they think it's a great product. I want them to come back because they want to share it with their friends and family, or give it to someone as a gift, but not because of what we do. This is a very, very important distinction for me. And I think that this is why I have been vocal in the past about the Tom's shoe model. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't believe in it. I thought it was a great marketing move, but and so I think that this question you ask, I would say, yeah, it's true. I mean, this is the default setting that a corporation, how a corporation should behave. But if we're willing to, make some assumptions, and then also ask the question of how can a company that wants to change the world, which, by the way, I don't want to change the world, but let's say that was my stated mission, then we need to ask ourselves, okay, well, then how can we trust them? What can we do? What things as a mindful consumer can we do to establish trust or no trust with a company?
Mm-hmm. And that really is quite a distinction, as you say, right? Where the company's job is to make money, but then if they want to solve a problem, defining what that is, so that makes sense. And I like what you say too about people, that you want people to recognize your business for the quality product that you produce and keep coming back because it's a quality product, but you also do good in the world, right? Which I think is interesting.
Well, and if I could just interrupt and say, and this is circular. So in other words, when I was saying before, that our vocation is to try to make great chocolate, and then we have this vocation within a vocation with working with farmers directly and working with students in Chocolate University. So it's all very circular. So that, what I mean by that is, making great chocolate allows us to do these other things, and doing these other things allows us to make great chocolate. That goes back to what I was saying earlier, that who we are and what we make are inextricably bound together. And so, not in some new age woo-woo way, but I mean in a real way, that our behavior contributes to the quality of our product. I believe that. Not just me. I mean, I think that's true for you and for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, just on that, I mean, there's the company and the responsibility of doing or producing a good product or service. And then, the other thing I'd like to kind of highlight, which you were talking to a little bit here, is, the idea of being a mindful consumer. And it's kind of like the other side of the coin, I suppose, because we all buy and sell different things, whether we work somewhere or we're out shopping or what have you. It's kind of two sides of the same coin in the way I see it. And so, I think that that's something important that I'm going to take away from this conversation and maybe would highlight for the listener is as much as we can talk about the business that you own or that you work in doing good in the world, on the other side of the coin is like being that mindful consumer. And although you may not be able to do it with everything in life, but certain things that become important to you, you can certainly identify as an individual to kind of highlight importance.
Yes, and we can become overwhelmed by this if we're not careful. I mean, I could talk the whole rest of the hour about the immoral issue of child slavery and chocolate in West Africa, and it's terrible and it's tragic, and there is a way out of this. I am working on this issue, even though I don't source beans from countries with child slavery issues, but this is not only in chocolate. I mean, we if we really think about it, we have very few excuses as consumers participating in these economies, because we have no excuse, because we now know. We know what's happening in the fashion world and where clothes are made and how they're made and how TV sets are made and who makes our iPhones and children. There's 1.58 million children in Ghana and Ivory Coast in the chocolate supply chain. It's a crime, literally a crime. So if we're not careful, we become overwhelmed to inaction, which is, I'm just little old me. I can't do anything, so I'm going to do nothing. I'm paralyzed by this, and so therefore, I will claim willful ignorance. And I understand that. I actually do, because the internet has it can be a burden. It really can be a burden. I mean, it could be. We watch the news, we listen to what's happening with the pandemic, and I mean, it's a burden. But Joseph Campbell said that we're called to joyfully participate in the sorrows of the world. And one of the ways to do that is to find this way to harmonize, just living our lives as aware, conscious human beings, but yet protect ourselves so that we don't just fall into a heap and, cover ourselves up in bed and never, want to leave the room. And I do think there are ways and things that people can do. And one is what we were just talking about, which is just, pick something. Just pick something you like that you maybe spend a fair amount of money on, and develop a relationship with a company and develop a trust relationship that's built over time. And that's how you do it. Just pick one thing at a time.
Yeah, it's kind of the small steps that accumulate over time. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, what you say is true about becoming overwhelmed. I mean, I think that from time to time there's an issue that comes up that seems very overwhelming, and you read about it, or you watch a news story about it, or someone is speaking about it at an event or something, and it's easy to become overwhelmed by the magnitude of difficulties that the world is facing around various issues. And I'll kind of use this as a segue into my next question, but in your book, you've mentioned that companies can and should solve problems in the world, which, as you can probably tell by our conversation, I agree with you on. But at the risk of being repetitive based on the last few minutes of our conversation, but can you share your perspective more on companies can and should solve problems in the world?
Yes. I thank you for not using the phrase social entrepreneurship. I don't like that term. I've tried to remove it completely from our website years ago. And I don't like it because, even though it's taught in colleges in North America and the West, and the reason I don't like it is because I think it's elitist. It separates the so-called good companies from the not good companies. And when it comes to small business, I think that, the so-called social business is a misnomer because it's redundant. In other words, the auto parts shop down the street that has been there for 25 years is a part of the neighborhood, and their employees have helped other neighbors when they've had things going on. They've contributed to neighborhood events. They've been a part of the community, and they try to provide solutions where they can with the money that they have. Those aren't you know hipsters who graduated from fill in the blank university with a degree in social entrepreneurship. These are just people who work on cars and just try to get by, but they're engaging with people in their neighborhood. So to that extent, this is not new. I mean, this is, I just call it good business. And this has been going on for decades. It's been going on for centuries, actually. And so, but my advocacy is for really small businesses like mine who might presume that there really isn't anything they can do to help, to check that, and to say, well, we're small, but we can do something. We can get together as a little company and as a leadership team and decide how we might be able to help some people. And in my view, it's actually, I'm more optimistic about this than I am multinational corporations that have huge marketing budgets that engage in social washing and greenwashing in such a way that it's misleading and misrepresenting, and harmful, actually, to people around the world, because it gives them cover to engage in bad behavior, like using children to make their chocolate. And so this is why I think it's incumbent on really small businesses to recognize that government can't do everything, and the religious institutions that we once could depend on to provide assistance is not what it once was. And as business people, we have a skill set, maybe not the same as religious institutions or government, and maybe we can't address some issues at scale, but we can do something. And when you have a group of people who are united behind some issue, what is it? Homelessness, education in your community, or it could be anything. It could be emotional health. It could be food insecurity. This is where sustainability happens. Because it's not a marketing campaign. It didn't originate in the marketing department. It originated among the leadership, or not leadership, just originated among employees in the company, and they just start doing something. And that, to me, is sustainability. And I'm very optimistic about this. I'm optimistic about this, and I think this is the kind of change that really can potentially have lasting effect. And one of the reasons why I think that it can have this lasting impact is because I actually think that globally, we are experiencing a sort of expansion of consciousness, from an evolutionary standpoint. And I think we're in it. And I especially think this is true among young people. And I see it, in students that I talk to and meet and have worked with. And so the work that they do will be driven not by a marketing campaign, but by love. That's how we solve problems.
Yeah, I mean, summing it up with love, I think, is incredibly potent idea in and of itself. So that's key, I think. With what you're talking about, I think, it kind of alludes to what you've talked about as finding your calling and that kind of thing. And I think that a couple of things I just want to recap before my next question is that, being or doing good in the world doesn't have to be a lofty ideal and solving something that's happening in a different world. It could be right in your own backyard. It could be something that you're doing in your local community, and that's impacting and improving the lives of people around you. So it doesn't have to be something that's taking place on the other side of the planet. And I think too, if you do want to solve something that's on the other side of the planet, it's not as out of reach maybe as sometimes we make it out to be. Particularly with the advent of technology, a voice can carry a very great distance in a world where you can post a video on various social media channels or YouTube, and it can be viewed by people all over the place. So I think that that's important to remember, and that's kind of what you've sort of been hinting at. So talking about your, the calling that you've been alluding to in your answer here, Shawn, where or how does a person or business figure that out? How do they decide on the calling and the problem to solve?
There's a couple of layers to this, and actually what's interesting about your question is when you said how does a person or a company, and actually this exploration is not that much different, whether it's just you or your company with a few people. And I think the first layer of this is just a kind of investigation, which starts kind of paradoxically by walking away or stepping away from the Google search box. And we've been conditioned to think that all answers lie within that search box. And we're also tempted, and I was myself, when searching for what I want to do, to think that we can kind of research our way into something that is more mysterious than just black and white. Now, for those people who say, either young people who are saying, I don't know what I want to do, or for people who have been in a career like I was for 20 years and want to change, the inclination, the instinct is to, as I said, Google all of the things that might give you hope of what you can do next. And you can do that. And I'm sure probably, maybe 1,000 people have already done it around the world just in the time we've been talking, if not more. And you can go on Indeed or LinkedIn or wherever and find a bunch of things that might be in your field or not in your field that sound like fun. And that's perfectly acceptable. But the challenge that I have and that I would offer to folks is if one is willing to explore the depths of why there is this dissatisfaction or why there is this trouble in finding the passion, inspiration, and next vocation in your life, then it's worth it, to kind of plumb the depths of why am I feeling this way? And I think it can yield great results, and it can be quite fulfilling, but it can also be filled with pain and suffering, as I mentioned in the first, few minutes of our discussion. And so the first thing is, I would say, don't research your way into this if you can resist that temptation. And I would say that, and this is an easy one, of course, I didn't make this up, but to sort of Venn diagram your way into the intersection of what are your talents and your passions, and the world's needs. And world needs can be anything. Could be your neighborhood, it could be your community, it could be your country or the world, or maybe it's your supply chain or whatever. And where are the intersections here? This begins to sort of show us, if you're willing to write it out and willing to maybe even write it in narrative form, it's also, I think, very helpful. But and I talk about that in the book. But you'll begin to see things that maybe you didn't see before if you're willing to kind of just write this down. Maybe type it out, but I prefer writing it down. And that then kind of opens up some avenues. But I still believe that there's more depth to plumb. And it depends on, and I can only speak, I have a limited audience with where I'm going to go next. And that is, and you probably know where I'm going, and that is this notion of exploring the depth of our broken hearts, the depth of our sorrow in our lives. And, most people, by the time they've had some life behind them, have had a broken heart. And those who have, reached 40 and say they don't really think they've ever had a broken heart, then I would want to talk to them and say, well, we need to get you one, because you haven't lived. If you've lived 40 years on this planet and you haven't had a broken heart, then we need to talk, because this is a place of great birth, this place of sorrow. And again, to quote my friend Khalil Gibran, he says that our greatest joy is our sorrow unmasked. So this is where the real work is. And for me, this place of sorrow was ultimately, upon reflection, the birth of my chocolate factory. That's a really long answer, but that's how it happens for me. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
And that's what companies can do too. That's what companies can do.
Certainly. And, it's in the story that we can find the points and learn from your experiences, Shawn. I think the conscious exploration of your soul and going deep on the issue and finding that intersection, I think is really important. But, there's truth to, I've heard a few different people say it, but, there's the phrase that's kind of around right now of your pain is your purpose, or your mess is your message. Like there's truth to that statement, in that, it bears weight for you. It's important enough to you to do something about, and you're connected to the issue. So I would say that.
Yes. And what I suggest to people in this place, and I talk about John O'Donohue a lot, and he unfortunately died way too young, in his 50s, but Irish poet philosopher John O'Donohue. But he describes this kind of in-between place as a threshold. And I love that metaphor, because we're not really here and we're not really there. And that can be really uncomfortable, can be scary, can be dark. But if we're willing to spend some time in this in-between place, the threshold, then there's a lot of sort of paradoxical and mysterious joy that we can find and experience, not all the time, because it would be impossible. But here's what happens. If you're willing to explore your own sorrow, and I'm not saying you have to have a psychologist to do this, or even a coach, or even reading a book. You can take a walk and explore your sorrow. But if you're willing to spend some time with this and not turn away, and not fall into the temptations of being distracted from that search, then here's what happens. You end up creating emotional space for consideration of things in your life that you might not have otherwise considered because you were too focused on finding the next thing. This is this is the paradox, the mystery, and what I mean then is that if at the depth of this exploration, it's not an ends means thing. I mean, we're not doing this in order to find the next job. We're doing this so we can create space so that those thoughts and opportunities and things and creativity that are in our peripheral vision, emotionally, can be seen by us. And when I say us, I'm especially speaking to people who are, driven, type A, hard charging. I'm going to find the answer to this kind of people. We struggle with that because we're used to sort of bulldozing our way through things to find answers and solve problems, and that's not what this is about. And so, when you experience this, I'll call it surrender. It's a sense, it's a sensation that is, as Gibran says, it's a sensation of joy and a sensation of uplift. And oddly enough, it has to do with your own broken heart. And this is where the creativity in one's life, I think, can really happen. And it's quite amazing, really. And I believe that all of these words that I've been saying are perhaps foreign to people in business, and I don't think they should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's definitely a change, I think, in the world, and kind of the consciousness thing that you were talking about earlier, particularly with young folks looking for more meaning and those kind of things. So I can see that, and I appreciate that. Just as we begin to wrap up a little bit here, Shawn, what would be a key message you want to leave with the listeners today?
I think a key message is, especially now, the key message would be, don't wait to find the perfect opportunity to serve someone. Just find out who needs you, and believe me, someone does, and serve them now, today, and do it with the expectation of nothing in return.
Powerful. And would your answer be the same then for what is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew?
No, I think I wish everyone knew, including me, that love is greater than fear.
So true. Much more powerful emotion. I agree.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Last question for you, Shawn. When it's all said and done, what 3 words do you want used to describe your life?
He loved me. That's what I want.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, Shawn, I really appreciate everything you've shared today, and an important message. And as I had told you before, I've been looking for someone to talk about doing work that matters and making a difference in the world in the ways that you are able to. So I really appreciate the conversation and what you've shared. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And, thank you. I, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Well, my pleasure. And I've loved speaking with you, and thank you for such great questions.
Thank you. Just before we close down today, could you just let everyone know where they could connect with you? Maybe they could buy a chocolate bar or find out more about what you're doing.
Sure. Well, Askinosie.com is our website, and people can find us there. And we're on social media as Askinosie Chocolate. And I have a little blog that I write in twice a year. It's ShawnAskinosie.com, and people can also email me from that blog. And those are the best ways. And then my book, Meaningful Work, is also a way for people to connect with these topics that we've been talking about. And there's a way for people to reach me in the book as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Shawn. For anyone listening, check out the show notes at ReshadOberlander.com. This has been a wonderful conversation with Shawn Askinosie, and we are wrapped up. We'll look forward to speaking with you again next week. Stay awesome. If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at RE Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.